Hello, everyone. This is Marc Sabatella from Outside Shore Music, and I'd like to welcome you to the Music Masterclass. So this is a very special session today that I'm doing to preview the upcoming Practical Counterpoint course. So we'll be talking all about counterpoint. We'll talk about counterpoint itself, the actual music, and we'll talk about logistics of the course, and I'll answer questions. Now, we are doing things a little different today. I've got things set up so that I can be hopefully people who aren't already in the community are able to be here. And I have set up some things that I'm able to monitor questions that they submit, that you submit. Hopefully there's some of you here today that are able to submit questions via this link that I've included. So I would love to see that that is working, because if not, then we have a little problem. But I would love it if someone that is here who is not already in the community and therefore isn't in the chat is able to use my special link to just pop a little something in so that I can see, that you're here and say, hey, I'm here. And if you got a question, you can go ahead and ask it. So meanwhile, I'm just going to go check that my dashboard and where I'm monitoring these things and see if anything comes in. It does look like there's some people here today that are visitors. So I will hope that that is all working all right. But I know a lot of you that are here are just curious about the course, and so let's talk about it. Let's talk about what we're going to expect. So first of all, yes, if you're already in the community, there's nothing unusual about this session. It's for people who aren't already in the community that I am a little just wanting to make sure that they're able to access this okay. And so that's what I'm hoping to get some sort of confirmation that people who are not already in the community are able to access via the special link that I put in for that. There should be people showing up here as visitors, and I'm not seeing that, and that has me a little concerned. But worst case is, well, the recording will be the recording, right? So I'm going to monitor things over here also, because there's a separate chat for the people who are visitors. And I'm just going to talk now about counterpoint. So first of all, definition of counterpoint is kind of tricky, and we talked about this a little bit. We talked about this a little bit in office hours, and as far as a definition of counterpoint, one way of looking at it is it's anything in which there are multiple melodic lines happening independently, in which you're more concerned, or at least as concerned, about them horizontally, the melodic component, as the vertical component, how they fit together. That's my my quick and dirty definition. So, for instance, this very piece that we just listened to, that we listen to every week, my opening theme, we have each of these lines here. We have the first violin come in with a melody, and then we have the second violin come in with a version of that same melody, and then the viola come in with a version of that same melody. This is what's called imitative counterpoint. This is one of the things we'll be discussing. So, David, I know you're a visitor in the sense that you're not already a gold level member, but you are already a member of the site. And so what I'm still a little concerned about is that I don't see anyone who is not a member of the site in any way, shape, or form, who doesn't have an account or login, because I definitely want people to be here who are not already on the site in any way. And I'm just not seeing that that's the case. And so that does have me a little bothered. But again, I'm just going to keep going on and just see what happens. So yes, this piece is example of what is called imitative counterpoint, which is kind of the most common thing. When we think about counterpoint, the word counterpoint doesn't necessarily mean imitative counterpoint, but they do kind of go hand in hand, because a lot of counterpoint is imitative. So let's really pay attention to this passage right here. Oops, let me turn the volume back up, and then we'll listen to it again. So let's listen to this passage here. Melody, melody, another melody. Right, so we have 3 different versions of that melody. First violin. Yeah, it helps to start it a little early sometimes. And then we have the second violin. And then we have the viola. Right, so it's the same melody being repeated. So you might think of a round in kind of informal parlance. A round is a particular type of imitative counterpoint in which everyone comes in with the exact same melody in the same key. Imitative counterpoint isn't always exactly that. Like in this example here, we see the first violin comes in with this melody starting on E, but then the second violin comes in with that melody starting on A, right? And then the viola comes in with that melody starting on E again, right? So this is one example of imitative counterpoint, and it's a big part of what we talk about in the course. And yet, it's not by any means the only thing that counterpoint involves. So I'm going to just kind of hop around and show you a couple other things about another form of counterpoint, and then we'll look at the actual structure of the course. And by all means, be popping in questions here. And I still don't have any questions or comments from people watching this as visitors, which still has me concerned. And so I'm feeling bad about that. But what I'm looking for is my version of hot cross buns that I have talked about a little bit before. And this piece involves counterpoint, but it's not imitative in any way at all. And so I'm going to play this piece for you. It's a short little piece, and just to talk about another aspect of counterpoint. So I'll just play it and then talk a little bit about it. But what you'll see is it starts off very simple counterpoint wise and then gets more complex, and yet there's nothing imitative about it. All right, so this is a melody, hot cross buns, that would be well familiar to anyone in the United States who went through the public school system and played recorder. It is the demonstration song that everyone learns on recorder. But this is my my arrangement of it, in which I put a second part to it. All right, so this is my arrangement of hot cross buns, in which I am using all sorts of the techniques that we're going to be learning about in this course, but it's not imitative, right? It's not like that second part comes in with the same melody as the original one a measure later. So I do have an email from someone here saying, yes, that this link is just not working, and that is bothering me to no end. It says you need to log into RS. Yeah, so this is just not working, and I feel very badly about this because I went to all the trouble of setting up all this so that people would be able to watch this who are not already members, and it is just not working. So give me one moment to just try one thing here to see if there's something I can do that will fix it. It says this should be working. Yeah, so unfortunately, I just don't know what's going on, and I can't. Yeah, it's just the way it is, I guess. So, so let's go ahead and talk a little bit about what's going on in this piece, and then we'll look at how it deals with what's going on in the course where we talk about it. The first version of this melody is very simplistic, right? It's two voices moving together, what's called parallel motion. There's nothing really that independent about what's going on. So this is the least contrapuntal. I mean, you can think of counterpoint as being like um, how would I put it? Kind of is a spectrum of a whole range of how contrapuntal something is. This is what we would call monorhythmic. That would be one term we could, or yeah, there's all sorts of different terms that are used in which both parts have the same rhythm, right? This next section here is still, it's not exactly the same rhythm between the two parts. The second part has a little bit more going on, but it's still basically just following the melody. And it's also very harmonic. It's really about indicating the roots of the chords, right? So this is really about indicating harmony more so than something like super contrapuntal. The next phrase, if anyone plays bass here, you might really recognize that as a common bass line. Right? I mean, it's a typical type of bass line. It actually kind of reminds me of the Barney Miller theme music from the 70s. If anyone remembers that show, it's not the same, but it's really a bass line. And the alto recorder is not a bass instrument by any means, but it's a bass line. This now is the point at which it started the most really contrapuntal in a more purely, it's like now we're at the major counterpoint end of the scheme of the spectrum. Right? And from that point on now, the alto part becomes at least as significant as the soprano part. That bottom part now is probably more melodic. It's got more interest going on than the original melody. Right? The original melody we're tired of by this point. We've heard the same thing over and over again, but now that alto part is becoming really more interesting. And yes, Allison, that bass line is boom, 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 boom. It's 1, 3, 4, sharp 4, 5, which is actually a very common chord progression from about 1800 on, but probably not so much before 1800. But the way it's written with those little grace notes becomes more of a kind of a rock thing, I would say. But the basic chord progression that's happening is definitely one that's been part of music since the classical era. And from that point on, the counterpoint in the alto becomes at least as interesting as the other part. This idea that there's no longer a melody and accompaniment is the point at which we have crossed that threshold from being kind of sort of contrapuntal to really contrapuntal, right? It is now the case that there is not one melody and everyone else is just accompanying. There's a term for that too. Homophony is sometimes used for that. But now we have equally important parts, and you get to choose which one to listen to. So that's kind of the, I don't know, my longer definition of counterpoint. There's that aspect of there being multiple things going on at once that are equally kind of interesting and important, right? So I'm now going to take a look at the syllabus for the course. And the syllabus is only partially published. Well, actually, let me take this. Well, yeah, you can look at it from here. This is the list of all the lessons. So the first, well, there's the introduction section that's going to be published Monday, but also on Monday is this section called Basic Principles. And in the Basic Principles section is where I will be kind of just defining some terms, giving you ways of looking at music, kind of along the lines of all the things that I just talked about. Texture, meaning whether the two parts are moving together or whether they're more independent. I will be talking about consonance and dissonance, right? If we look at my my arrangement of hot cross buns, you'll see some places where there's consonance between the two voices. This B up here. This right here is a dissonance. That's a consonance. This is also a consonance, but that one's a dissonance, right? So we are going to be paying attention to which notes are consonant, which notes are dissonant as we line them up vertically like that. And what we'll discover is different conventions over time for where consonants and dissonance are used. Consonants meaning like notes that sound good together, that's great. Notes that sound different, that sound dissonant together, right? This is dissonant. Dissonant doesn't mean bad. Hopefully I've made that point enough, like in the harmony course and elsewhere, that dissonant doesn't mean it's bad. It just means it causes tension. Well, we want tension in music so that we can release it. We can release it. And then we have released that tension by resolving it to a consonance. And so this idea that we're constantly going to have this dynamic between what's consonant and what's dissonant, that's an absolutely integral part of how music works. And so we'll learn kind of like principles of what defines consonance, what defines dissonance, and then we're going to learn principles of where dissonance is typically used in different genres. Like we'll learn in the Renaissance, there's certain kind of conventions for where dissonance happens that are more restrictive than the Baroque. In the Baroque era, the idea of where dissonance can happen and the nature of that dissonance kind of expands. Bach and composers of his time had a much broader sense of what they could do with dissonance than Palestrina and composers of his time did. And then as you move forward, you move into Schumann or Stravinsky or Duke Ellington, anyone from the mid 1800s on has an even broader sense of what can be done with dissonance. How much of it, what types of dissonance we can enjoy in music, and how much of it there can be, and when it can how it's going to resolve. And so we're going to learn all of these different treatments of consonance and dissonance kind of as they pertain to different styles, as opposed to this is how things are, you must do this rule, because it's not that. Dissonance isn't a set of rules you must follow, or music theory in general, as I've made the point. It's just if you make this sound, it's going to have this effect on people, and then you get to decide, well, do you want to have the same effect as Renaissance music, or an effect more like Baroque music, or an effect more like jazz, or whatever, right? So that's kind of those basic things that we'll be looking at here as consonance and dissonance. Voice leading has to do with the nature of your melody and how the melodies move, and when leaps versus steps are good, and what kinds of leaps are okay, that kind of thing. And we'll also talk about this idea of parallel motion versus contrary motion. We'll talk about all sorts of things like that. So that's all in that first week. The second week is when we get much more into the specifics of what's going to happen as we have two voices, which notes are consonant, or what are we going to do with those consonant and dissonance? What if the notes are moving together like this, meaning rhythmically at the same time, whether it's contrary or parallel, they're moving at the same time. We're going to learn one set of principles for that. We'll learn another set of principles that applies. So sometimes that's called first species counterpoint, when you have the two voices moving together like we have here. When you have things like, let me skip over here. Here we have what we would call second species counterpoint, just to use a term that's used in some pedagogical materials from the Baroque era, where they're pedagogical materials used to understand the Renaissance, where we have two notes against one note. There's actually more than that going on here. I could really argue it's more complicated than that still, and in ways I'll talk about compound lines and how this line here is really two different melodies. There's one line that goes G, F sharp, G, and another line that goes D, C, B. So this alto part is really playing two different contrapuntal lines. Do, 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 and another one that goes bum, 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 kind of at the same time. And then the same story with the next phrase. So we'll learn all about those things. That's called a compound line when you're kind of moving back and forth between lines. I'll talk about how that works. But the general idea that there's multiple notes in one voice while there's only a single note in another voice, that's what we would call second species or third species, depending on how many notes there are. This idea here, where we have this high note happens, and then the other note moves, right? One note moves, and then while it's sustaining, the other note moves, and then while it's sustaining, the other note moves. This is something that we refer to as fourth species, and we'll learn all the conventions for how consonance and dissonance works there, how voice leading works there. So these are all the things that we learn about as it relates to working with two voices. And so that's going to be in the next week's lesson. The next batch so the first week of lesson is that basic principles stuff. The second week's lessons is all the stuff about these different species and so forth. And then the third week's lessons, I'll flip over to this view actually. That section, by the way, that counterpoint in two parts, we're going to stay on that for several weeks. We're going to stay on all these sections for like 3 weeks, because what we're going to do is I'm going to release the lessons. This is going to be like, I don't know, a couple hours worth of video probably to watch. And then there'll be some exercises and things that go along with it. And we're going to have like a little project where you write a piece using two voices. And it, could be like hot cross buns, or it could be like something else. But where you're going to write a piece to put into practice all the principles of this section. So we're going to stay with each of these sections. The first section we'll just do for 1 week, but the next sections after that we'll stay with for several weeks so that we can really do projects and really explore the materials. Well, the next section of the course has to do with counterpoint in 3 or more parts. And as an example of that, I often look at things like Bach, Brandenburg Concerto. I'll just pull that up on MuseScore.com. Just because the Brandenburg Concertos use a lot of counterpoint, and it's not necessarily all or even mostly imitative counterpoint, but it is counterpoint involving multiple voices. And you can see this right here, that there's multiple things going on. There's multiple instruments. Here you can kind of see that there's 3 different things, right? I mean, if you look at the music here, I'll play this passage right here. So we have this one line with all the 16th notes, and then we have this other line that's got some 16th notes, but not as many as that line. And then we have this other line that's all 8th notes, right? That's 3 different parts together. And these guys are all playing in unison. These guys are all playing in unison. These guys are all playing in unison. Guys or gals, sorry. So there's like 3 separate lines happening at the same time, and yet pairwise, we still care about the consonance and dissonance between them. So the next kind of major section of the course is going to deal with that. It's going to deal with the issues of how you manage when you have more than just 2. Because at first we're going to learn how to manage 2 parts and the consonant and dissonance between them. But then we're going to talk about 3 parts. And here is like one of these things that is like, I don't know, it's sort of mind-blowing to me. I don't know, my mind's blown easily maybe. But I'm gonna point something out to you that some of you are probably aware of, but for some of you, this might be like as new as it was for me when I first, encountered this fact. And let's say that we know that the consonant intervals are thirds and sixths. So I'll start with C. A third above C is consonant, a sixth above C is consonant, and a fifth above C is consonant. All right. Those are the consonant intervals. Thirds, sixths, those are called imperfect consonances, and fifths. Now, yes, octaves are consonant too, but I'm going to ignore those. Fourths are special. We're going to learn all about that in the course, why fourths are special, why they're consonant in some contexts, dissonant in other contexts. The dissonance is of a different nature than that dissonance, and so the how and when it needs to resolve is different. But we're going to learn that fourth is like this special thing to worry about. But so let's come back to the fact, and then seconds are always dissonant, sevenths are always dissonant. If all you got are consonant intervals, thirds, fifths, and sixths, and you want to have 3 notes at the same time and no dissonance between them, you really only have a couple of choices for that. If I want to have another note with that C, hey, let's go with a third above it. Now, let's say I wanted to have another interval, another note in my texture. I want to add a third note, and I say, hey, let's go with a fifth above that E. That should be consonant. Yeah, but it makes a 7th above the bottom note, right? So I'm not saying you can't have that, but it won't be all consonant. This will be a dissonant chord that then needs to resolve. Well, what if I have my third here, and I say I want to add well, that's basically it. I can then add another third. If I add another third, now I have a third between here and here, a third between here and here, and a fifth between here and there. Well, that's a triad. So even before people started thinking about triads, they were just thinking about consonances, and they're like, hey, if I play these 3 notes together, it's all consonant. Consonant here, consonant here, consonant there. All the intervals are consonant. So we're going to use that combination a lot. Eventually, they put a name on it and called it a triad. Well, what you're going to find out is if you want to have only consonances between your 3 voices, major and minor triads are the only way to do it. So that's a major triad, a minor triad, a third here, and a third here. I'm just sticking to just the white keys for now, in part because kind of historically that kind of mimics some aspects of Renaissance music when this stuff was all coming down, even though it's not literally just white keys in Renaissance music. But minor, if I have a minor third and a major third interval, I get another consonance here. 3 notes together, consonant, consonant, consonant. So what you find out is as soon as you have 3 voices together, if you want them to be consonant against each other in all combinations, you're going to be writing triads. So whether you've learned about triads or not, just knowing about consonant dissonance is going to cause you to create triads because you really have no other choice. If you want to have 3 notes sounding together with no dissonance, you have no choice. Major and minor triads are the only way to do it. So that's kind of I don't know. Like I said, it was sort of mind-blowing for me to realize that the major and minor triads really are special. There really aren't other combinations of notes that have no dissonances in them. So there are dissonances all over the place in this music here. For instance, right here, I see a place where there's a C sharp in the bass. And gosh, what note is that? This note is a C, D, A, G. It's a G in the violas here. So the cellos have a C sharp, and we have a G in the violas, and violins have an A at that point. There's a dissonance here. There's a dissonance there. Well, that's fine. It's fine to have dissonance. It's going to resolve. We're going to resolve that dissonance typically by moving to a triad that whether it's that triad or some other triad, we're going to resolve that dissonance by moving to a triad. So these are all the kinds of things we're going to be learning about as we study the subject of counterpoint in 3 or more voices, how these voices all work together to form consonances and dissonances, and where we need to resolve things and how we're going to resolve them, how those conventions might differ between the Renaissance versus the Baroque versus more modern music. We're going to cover all of these sorts of things. All right, I am now going to come back to the syllabus and say, okay, well, that's what we're going to talk about having to do with 3 or more parts. We'll also talk about things like, well, how maybe 2 of those parts work together, right? If we look at that Brandenburg again, you can see that bum, ba, ba, bum, ba, bum, ba, ba, bum and bump, 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 bump. These are two voices moving together, and they're moving together very simply, right? Si, ba-da-dum, while the upper voice has. So we could say those are two voices. Right, that's let it be, right? That little line there, those parallel thirds moving down in the same melody, that's like two voices doing one thing while another voice is doing something else. Yes, they're not the same pitches, but rhythmically they're together. And so we'll learn about the different ways of organizing things so that maybe some voices are working together rhythmically and someone else is working against it, and the different levels of texture that that can create, depending on how many really rhythmically different things are going on at once. Because yeah, when you have two voices, it's going to be pretty common that they'll both be doing different things rhythmically. When you have more than two voices, it's going to be pretty common for a couple of them to pair up like that, so that still there's really only two different rhythmic things going on, or maybe two complex rhythmic things and a third simple rhythmic thing. So we're going to learn all about that kind of thing. So then there's a whole section. So we'll spend a few weeks on that, and then we're going to spend a few weeks on the subject of imitation. And before I talk about imitation, I'll say a little more about what happens in each of these weeks. Again, I'm going to release at the beginning of the session, at the beginning of each 3-week period, I'll release the lessons, and there will be, as you can see in the imitation section, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 lessons, and they're averaging, I don't know, say 10 minutes each. Some of them are shorter, some of them are longer. So this is basically a couple hours worth of material here. Does my other version of it here have the title? Well, you can see here, so like some of them, that's 16 minutes, 12 minutes, 17 minutes. So these are some longer ones. So yeah, this whole section is going to be longer. Here's the imitation. So this one's only 7, that one's 8. But this one's 15, right? So it's going to be, somewhere around a couple hours worth of lessons, but you can watch these at your leisure, right? I'm going to release them at the beginning of the 3-week period. You watch the lessons at your leisure, and then I will post demonstrations and exercises and projects, because I will have you write a 3-voice piece using the techniques we learn. And then when we learn about imitation, you're going to write an imitative piece. And so we're going to learn all about how imitation works in counterpoint. The idea that even though nothing about the word counterpoint requires imitation, and thanks, Martha, for that comment about the bite-sized chunks. Yeah, I definitely try to break things down as much as I can. So imitation has this special relationship with counterpoint, where even though nothing about the word counterpoint requires imitation, it is just such a big part of kind of what's expected. That's, I guess, the best thing I can say. It's just expected that you're going to use imitation. It's just like something the composers using counterpoint. If you're going to have two independent things happening, there is just this. Did I type prelude or did I type fugue? I feel like I must have typed. No, I said fugue. Darn it. I want the fugue. I want the fugue. Here's the fugue. All right, good. If you're going to have like two independent things happening, how does the brain sort out what these two different things are happening? And I will post a link. So this is a good question from Mr. P.O. Berne. I will say in the main page for the course, I will post a link to one lesson you can watch on your own, because I'm going really fast right now and speaking off the top of my head. Let's go through actually one of those lessons. Let's just do that. Let's just check one of these things out. Each lesson, and this is the old version of the course here, and the old version of the course is on Teachable. I'll be moving this over to Circle. So what you're going to see, which is the site we're on right now, what you'll see is a video which involves me talking through something, and then you'll see a handout. And the handout, you can read the handout, right? There's words there, and then you can click on a measure here and play it. right? So you can play the examples within the handouts directly. You don't even need to have MuseScore. If you do have MuseScore, you can load these into MuseScore and play them there. And for blind users, that's a great way to then be able to access these handouts and read the musical examples one note at a time using your screen reader. But you can also just not use MuseScore and just play the handouts online. So here is the video that goes with this, and I'm going to just play a little of this video, and you'll see that I'm a lot calmer in these videos than I am in these live sessions. So let's just listen to a couple minutes of this particular lesson. Sequence. In this lesson, we're going to look at a really specific but very common melodic device involving imitation, where we have a motif, and then we repeat that motif again, say a step above. And then we repeat it again, another step above. So it's usually in threes, sometimes more than threes, but in order to be called a sequence, it's usually at least three. Or maybe it's down a step each time. Perhaps it's up a third each time, or down a third each time. It could be any other interval, but really the step is the most common one. Now that imitation could be real or tonal, doesn't really matter. But as long as you just hear that same motif like 3 times in a row at a different pitch level each time, we can call it a sequence. So, all right, I'm going to pause it there so you can see that it's me talking through things, looking at the handout, and I'll refer to it. Martha, you're talking about the size of the screen share. I will say that the screen share takes up as much space within the window as the window allows, right? So you've got the chat on the side, the screen share in the middle. You can close the chat temporarily by clicking the chat icon, and now the screen share gets a little bigger. And also make sure your entire window is full screen, right? If you're not looking at the whole window full screen, go to your top right on no matter what operating system you're on. Usually there's a icon at the top right there to make your window full screen. That's how to make things as big as you can. So if I keep scrolling through this, you'll see, I talk through the handout and I play through the examples and so forth. The next one's the fifth and the fourth again, and the last one is 2 octaves in a row. Right, so I'm just talking through each of these examples. One voice is ba-da-da-da-da-da-da, right? And so I'm going through the handout, talking about the points and explaining things, but then you have the handout already there as your kind of reminder of, oh, this is what we learned about in this course. So to me, having the two of these together, the video demonstrations combined with the handouts, that really go well with it, and having the handouts be interactive where you can play them online, yeah, I feel like that's kind of a strength of this course. All right, so what am I going to do now? I'm going to go back to the overview of the course and just point out that imitation, that idea that we're going to have things, and Paul, I'll get to your question in a second. So actually, let me flip back over to that example for a second. That example was from Fiorlise, right? You remember that? You recognize that? The thing I would observe about it is that this little line, that's a motif, then is that same motif down a step, then is that same motif down another step, right? That's an example of a sequence. So that's one of the things that we do with imitation. We don't necessarily mean imitation between 2 voices. And it could mean imitation, one voice imitating itself. But in other lessons in this section, we'll talk about, well, what does happen when the voices imitate each other. And if you saw the video that I posted and that I put in the newsletter earlier this week, the one 2 steps forward and 1 steps back, that is one of those other mind-blowing ones. And I know that was a pretty advanced lesson to talk about, that whole 2 steps forward, 1 step back lesson that I posted Tuesday. If you haven't watched it yet, do it, but don't get scared. We take an entire course to work up to that and explain what's going on. But that is essentially what gets covered in this lesson here called Canon in 2 parts. The idea that we can have a melody and it can then get imitated in another voice, where I played a melody, and then same melody, but a fifth apart, a measure later. So this is canon. You have a melody in one voice, and then that same melody repeated later in another voice, but maybe not at the same pitch level. It's a round if it's at the same pitch level. Where I'm playing the same melody in the same key. Where I'm playing the same melody in the same key in both voices, but in most canons, they're not necessarily in the same key. It's verses. And we're going to learn all the techniques of doing that, because that idea of having these voices coming in different keys is huge. Again, not because counterpoint itself demands it, but it's the convention. Composers working in these styles have really glommed on to the idea that we really like imitation. My theory about this is, if you're going to have a lot of things going on at the same time, the brain needs something to hold on to sort it out. I think I started to say that before and then got sidetracked. The brain needs something to hold on to so that it's not overwhelmed by the chaos. And hey, I just heard that melody before. That's one of those things. I think I know I've mentioned several times to anyone who's was watching previous sessions here knows that I've been talking about the Bach Mass in B minor a lot lately, and I saw this performance of it on Sunday, which was fabulous, and it was really amazing to me. I mean, they did such a good job in the performance. It's the Colorado Bach Ensemble. Of every time there was one of these imitative things and some other section would come in with the same part, it was just so clear that it was the same thing, because they did what they need to do with dynamics so that the entrances of each part. Oops. I forgot what was going on. I forgot my melody now. But by making sure that the new entrance, when it comes in, is audible, that the ear can pick it out, then you're like, oh, I've heard that melody before. It isn't chaos of two different things going on before. It's something happening, and now it's the same thing happening again while something else is going on. And that helps the brain make sense out of it. The other thing that helps the brain make sense out of it in choral music, like the Mass in B minor, is that the words would have been well known to the audience. Even though they were in Latin, the audience for the Bach Mass in B minor was accustomed to going to church and hearing the Mass sung in, or spoken in Latin, or sung in Latin. So when you hear, Kyrie eleison, oh yeah, I know what that is. And so even if it's being sung a million different times, overlapping itself, you can still go, oh, Kyrie, I know what this prayer is, right? So in vocal music, it helps when the lyrics are well known, but it also helps if there's multiple things going on, if melodically they're repeating itself. That helps the brain sort out what is going on. So that is a reason why imitation is so powerful in contrapuntal music. And another thing is, when I mentioned about the fifth, when I mentioned about like the fact that the imitation is typically at the fifth, well, there's a good reason for that also. And it has to do with the ranges of the human voice, right? This is a typical soprano range, right? We're going from middle C to the E, an octave and so above it. I mean, yes, it could go a little lower, could go a little higher. But somewhere around here is a comfortable soprano range. Somewhere around here is a comfortable alto range. Somewhere around here is a comfortable tenor range. Somewhere around there is a comfortable bass range. And yes, we can extend beyond that. But therefore, if you're going to have a comfortable soprano melody that lives in this range, if the altos are going to sing that same melody, they're not going to be comfortable singing it in that same octave because it's going to go too high for them. They're not going to be comfortable singing it in this octave because it's going to go too low for them. They're going to say, hey, I want to sing it in this range. That's what's comfortable for me. And what do you know? It does mean that it's basically a fifth above or a fourth below. It's not the only way of organizing it, and there's plenty of canons that are a third. You know, the second entrance comes in a third above or a third below, but most common is a fourth or a fifth, because it really fits the range of the human voice well. And therefore it also fits typical strings. The violin, viola, cello have pretty much that same relationship, right? Same relationship of soprano, alto, and tenor. The violin range starts with G here. The viola range starts with C here, and then the cello range actually is a lot lower. But still, it's not, they're not octave. They're not all octaves apart. It's from the violin to the viola. It's basically a fifth, and so there you go. And Dave, yes, I wouldn't say that modern audiences know anything about Latin, because no, it's not taught anymore. Catholic Church stopped doing masses in Latin, before I was born or right around the time I was born. So I've never heard a mass in Latin, although I've been to Catholic masses. I don't know how many. Has it been thousands of times? Certainly hundreds of times in my life. But I've never heard one in Latin. But my parents heard it the first half of their lives. My grandparents and their grandparents heard nothing but masses in Latin. And in Bach's time, they heard nothing but masses in Latin. So definitely that would have been more familiar then. All right. So this idea of canon, of having a piece that then repeats, that whatever that first melody is, say, repeats a fifth higher, fifth lower, fourth lower, whatever, and then and they work together. The way that we have to work out the music to make that possible, I mean, it's kind of crazy how complex it is to make it happen. But I'll go ahead and put in well, I'm going to yeah, I'm actually just going to move on, because I just want to make sure we get through the rest of the material here. But yeah, so the idea of canon, it doesn't necessarily mean the entire piece is going to be nothing but one person sings something, someone else sings the same thing a couple measures later. But it means that portions of it will be arranged that way. And there might be other parts that are different. So like if we look at that Bach Brandenburg concerto, there probably are imitative parts of it here. If I look hard enough, I'll probably be able to find some. Someone might have to tell me where I'm going to find them, because I don't remember what I'm looking at here exactly. But if we look hard enough, we'll probably find a place where we can see a melodic line happening. Here I see da 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 da, and now I see da 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 da. Right. So this is some sort of imitation happening there. Is it pure canon? I don't really know. Here's that same melody again. Da 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 da. Right. So it's another version of that same melody. So when you have that sort of imitation, it might be little sections of it that do that, and then other parts of the piece, the voices work together more. Or other parts of it, they're just not imitative at all. They're most pieces, even if they're using canon technique, are not purely nothing but canon. So once we get past that section, and this section is probably this is the section that I learned the most just creating the course. In other words, just putting these lessons together, I learned a ton about canon that I didn't already know, despite having studied it at the graduate level. I had done, I had written fugues, I had done all this sort of stuff before, but there's some things about canon that I had never really learned in grad school. And it was trying to teach it and figuring out ways of teaching canon that I hit on things like that 2-step up, 2 steps forward, 1 back. Not that I invented that, but when I was introduced to that concept and then saw how it could apply to other concepts as well, I went crazy for like a week writing as many canons as I could to really teach myself what was involved in writing canons, and then boiled it down to, a few 15-minute lessons for you to enjoy. So anyhow, this section here, I feel like, is the centerpiece of the course, learning all these imitation techniques. This is really, I think, the star. I think it's the star of the course, for my money. There's a lot of great stuff in it, but that section really goes above and beyond, I think, because everyone teaches imitation, but I don't think most people teach imitation like I do in there. That's my plug for myself. All right, so the final 2 sections of the course are Let me go back to logistics. So, because there was question about how you recommend we learn. So, yeah, what I would say is when the lessons are posted on Mondays, it'll be like every third Monday. Watch them at your leisure. Try to watch them all in that first week if possible, and then you'll have 2 weeks to work on the material. But don't watch them faster than you can really absorb them, right? Don't binge watch the lessons. You won't absorb it. Watch them more slowly. If you need to watch those couple hours of lessons and spread them out over 3 weeks, that's great. Do it. The next couple of weeks there will be these projects I will assign, and then you can start working on them. And in order to complete the project, you will want to have watched all the lessons for that section. But you can certainly get started without watching them all and kind of, jump back and forth. So everyone's learning style is a little different. Remember that on Tuesdays will be office hours, right? And that's where you can meet with me. We'll do face-to-face, not just me talking at you like this, but meet face-to-face, like a Zoom meeting, except it's here on Circle. And so in those sessions, you can ask me questions. I can answer. I can go over your work. We can, it's really interactive. Every Thursday will be music masterclass like this, and I will take some of the work that you've all posted. If you've posted your projects, I will go over them and give constructive feedback on them, and we can all learn together. So I don't know that I can get to everyone's project every week. I know I won't be able to, but often the same things come up. So I'll give one person feedback on something they did and point out where they use parallel fifths that they maybe shouldn't have used, because that's a thing. And then other people go, oh yeah, I think I did the same thing. And then we'll all learn by watching each other. So Thursdays, those will be live sessions, but those will be recorded also, so you could be watching those. All right. So the final two sections of the course are also, there's stars too. But these are in-depth explorations of two specific genres or types of composition. In the Renaissance, there were all sorts of different types of piece that were written, but a motet is a particularly important one. And to be honest, really the only difference between motet and like that Bach B minor mass is if the text is the actual literal mass, it's called a mass. If the text is some other prayer, a psalm or something, it's called a motet. But musically, they are often virtually identical. They don't have to be, but they often are. Anyhow, we're going to be focusing on this motet idea, and it's a particular format of piece that uses imitative counterpoint, using a Renaissance mindset, harmonically and rhythmically. Everything about how it works is how Renaissance composers wrote sacred music. And we're going to go deep into what those things are, what makes something a motet, what the things are that kind of make it up. And I will go over that, go over some examples, go over all the intricacies of what goes into making a motet. And then I actually will demonstrate creating one, and you all will create one. And this is the thing that I put in the newsletter today. And I'm going to play just a moment of it here so you can see what I mean by a motet. I would play, an actual motet by Palestrina or someone, but I actually want to play my own because I want to make an observation. Did I not put my own name in here? Nope, I got to put my own name. Sabatella, my Piesu. So the reason I put this on here is because I am going to fully acknowledge that this doesn't totally sound like the Renaissance. It uses all the Renaissance conventions, but I don't live in the Renaissance. I didn't grow up listening to exclusively Renaissance music. So there's a certain aspect of what's going on harmonically that sounds 100 years. Oops, I didn't mean to start it. That sounds like 100 years or so more modern. And madrigals is another Renaissance style, right? So there's motets, there's masses, there's madrigals, there's all sorts of different particular things. Most madrigals, well, no, I'm not enough of an expert to make claims about most madrigals. The ones that I'm familiar with are relatively not, when I talk about the spectrum, they use more of the voices moving together, more of that monorhythmic type of texture. Um, uh, are often using that, and then they'll have sections that go into more polyphony. And so that idea of a verse and a chorus, it kind of, if we relate it to sort of modern pop music or something, the idea that there'll be sections of it where everyone's kind of moving together, and then portions of it that are more contrapuntal. That's my experience with a lot of madrigals that I've heard. But in any case, I'm going to play a little bit of this Pie Jesu so that you can hear that it's using the trappings of Renaissance motet. But if you want to listen to it and say, harmonically, that sounds a little more modern. I mean, I'm not talking 20th century modern. I'm talking 18th century modern. I will totally acknowledge that. To me, that's a strength, because it tells me that you can learn from Renaissance techniques while writing music in other styles if you want. So that's a little bit of that piece. That's some of my students from Regis University that I enlisted to record their parts for that. So in form, in all basic respects, this is in the style of a Renaissance motet, but my own harmonic sense is a little more modern. There's things in it that you don't typically see until the classical era. There's nothing that's really, I'm not using jazz techniques or anything like that, but it's definitely, especially as you work a little deeper into it, some more sounds. So again, all the techniques, all the things going on are very much based on this Renaissance motet style. But if it sounds a little more modern, that's fine by me. The final section of the course is basically the same thing applied to Baroque fugues. And this is where things like that Bach fugue in C major that I started to try to bring up and then got sidetracked. Fugue C major. This is usually like everyone's biggest introduction to the idea of counterpoint is the idea of what are called fugues, and fugues involve imitative counterpoint. So we're going to hear this melody here come in, and then you're going to hear it get imitated. So here's, wow, this is really old. I mean the playback. And now. Right? So it's imitative counterpoint. There's four voices. First, someone comes in with that, then someone else comes in the second voice, a fifth higher, and then someone comes in with that third voice, an octave lower than that, and then someone comes in with the fourth voice, an octave lower than the initial voice. That particular ordering is actually a little bit unusual, and we'll talk about that in the course. But these voices come in with that imitative counterpoint, but they don't completely imitate each other. Like what the first voice does while the second voice is coming in, it's not necessarily the case that anyone else does that same thing later. So it's not everything the first voice does gets imitated in the second. It's about a subject. It's about a particular melodic line that is the motif, the main theme of that piece. And we're going to hear it over and over again throughout the piece. Later on in the piece, this section is called stretto, where one voice comes in with ba da da dum, and then boom, boom, oh no, ba da da dum, boo doo doo dum, boo doo doo dum. Right? These voices come in overlapping each other. The first time that subject came in, the first voice had two measures or measure and a half all to itself before the next voice comes in, but now they're starting to overlap each other after only a couple of beats. That's called stretto, and that's not a requirement that fugues have these overlapping sections, but it's what makes fugues fun to me to compose. And so we'll learn all about how to make that happen, how to create these lines such that you can create these strettos. When you design your subject, not all subjects are going to be able to work with stretto. And the techniques for figuring out how to make a line that works in stretto, that's one of the things we learn about in the course. And, you know, by the time you're done, you will be able to write a fugue. All right. So that is that's what I got to tell you about the course. So hopefully I got to as many of the questions as, because I never did figure out what was going on. I should make a quick check over and see if something ever happened that allowed people to post questions, but I don't think it did. It doesn't look like. Yeah, I just never managed to get any guest things in there. So whatever I did to try to set that up didn't work, and I feel very badly about that, but I will make sure the recording is available. So that's what you need to know about the course, and I hope that gives you some idea that, yes, there's a lot of material here. We're going to take our time going through it. You're going to get plenty of time to review the material, watch the videos at your leisure, go through the handouts, go through the exercises I'll give, work on projects, get feedback from me. I mean, it's going to be a huge undertaking that we're all going to undertake together and support each other and all come out of it having learned so much. Yeah, it's going to be amazing. So I really hope to see as many of you there as possible, and I will see you next week in the course. Yeah, and now my system is clogged. Okay, there you go. So thanks everyone for being here. And again, for those of you who tried to be here live and weren't able to, I really apologize for that. And hopefully the replay video is still useful to you. And we'll see if I can do some other quick Q&A session as a makeup for that. So Monday, I will be posting all the first batch of lessons. If you haven't already signed up for the course, go ahead and do so. It's, you know, you do that by enrolling as a gold level member. If you were already signed up for the Counterpoint course, you know, a few years ago when I first launched it, just sit tight. I will be sending you later today instructions on how to participate in the in this cohort, because I know you've already purchased, you know, the course materials. So I'll send you information on how to participate. So thanks everyone, and see you soon.